Hello legends and welcome. On today's video we're going to be going over a little bit of a beginner's guide for the aircraft carriers. We're going to start at tier 5 mainly because tier 3 doesn't give you a true representation of what to expect from the carriers on the nations you get them in. We'll just briefly run over the pros and cons to each nation. Not going to go too in depth. This is going to be probably a part 1. And the other parts I will go more in depth into each nation, probably some footage on some gameplay, and sort of some of the premium ships where they differ from the main line. Ark Royal, which you can see on the screen now, that's a little bit different to its tier 5 counterpart, which is the Furious. So I wouldn't go out and buy a premium carrier until you decide you like playing them. A bit of a niche gameplay, game style, play style even. So go up the tech tree on the nation that you find the most interesting. Really, they're all good in their own way. If you like Americans, go for the Americans. If you like Japanese, even if it's just the look of the boat, it doesn't really matter. They've all got their pros and cons. I will explain what their pros and cons are. I'll probably say my opinion on which ones I prefer the most and why. But it's just going to be a quick overview, just to try and help you make a decision on which line you could pursue, because to get to tier 7 on aircraft carriers, quite a lot of games involved without boosting. I try not to boost any ships. I just use the global XP for buying ships from the store. So we'll get this started. But if you could like and subscribe, that would be a great help. And we'll start off with Great Britain. So for the British, I'm not going to go over too many of the stats. It's just a quick rundown. So mainly on their aircraft. Survivability doesn't really matter if you're spotted in an aircraft carrier. You're going to get shot at. All you can do is try and run, hide, angle as best as you can. Your artillery, for example, secondaries, if somebody's that close to you, you ain't going to do a lot to them, even if it's a destroyer. Some of the aircraft carriers do have quite good secondaries, but usually if you're spotted and you get hunted, you're going to die unless you can kill them with your planes first, or the team helps you. AA on all aircraft carriers is pretty good. There are some which are better than others. I try and spec into the AA quite a lot on my carriers, just because sometimes you do get other players in aircraft carriers that all they want to do is attack your aircraft carrier. All you can do that is try and position yourself behind your own ships so they get AA'd on the way through, and it's best AA as you can to sort of get rid of their ships. The more ships you take down to them, the harder it is to get more planes in the air for them. Maneuverability doesn't really matter too much either. You're big, you're slow, got big turn circles, so, and concealment, that ranges quite a lot on ship to ship. Some are stick out like a sore thumb, some are quite stealthy, but again, you just got to play the map. Make sure you're not spotted. If you do get spotted, try and figure out where you're spotted from and move away from it. So we'll just do a quick rundown now on the pros and cons for the British planes. This isn't just for tier 5, this is tier 7s, the premium of Great Britain. Completely forget about tier 3s. Like I said, they're pretty generic before you hit the tier 5. So the aircraft for the Furious, as you can see, they've got pretty good HP on their planes. The speed of them is average, I'd say. They're quite a good plane. They're quite versatile because they've got pretty good health points, and the speed's not too bad for scouting or getting out of trouble. The damage on the torpedoes is pretty low damage, and the speed of the torpedoes is very slow. It's quite hard to go from, say, a Japanese torpedo bomber to a British, mainly because you've just got to lead your target by so much more. The only good thing about the British is the torpedo aiming reticle does sort of cone in, so the torps will go closer together the further away, the closer you get to the target. So that can be quite nice. The dive bombers, Again, pretty good HP. They're quite high up there on the HP. Speed is a little bit slower than the torps, so they're about average on the speed. The bomb damage, lowish, not nothing great, but you drop a lot of bombs, so it adds up that way. It's a carpet bomber, and like just a HE bomb or an AP bomb. So it's not really a true representation of that bomb damage compared to, say, the Germans, because the Germans will only drop, say, 2 bombs in their strike. You'll drop, I think, 5 from each plane, so they're not all going to hit. This is good. Fire chance is pretty low, but you have got a lot of bombs. That's probably how they counter the ones that only drop 1 or 2 bombs, because you're going to drop a lot more in one run. They're quite good at taking out destroyers. They're not the best, but I prefer to go for a destroyer in a Furious or a British aircraft carrier over Japanese or the American, just because you cover a little bit more of a wider area for your bombs to land in. So they're quite good for destroyer hunting. And as a carrier, you will be doing a lot of destroyer hunting. That is your number 1 goal. You've got to spot, and you've got to harass the destroyers. The quicker you can get the destroyers off the board, the better for your team. Destroyers win games most of the time. If there's a destroyer at the end of the game, he's done really well to get that far, and if you're the carrier, you've not done very well to take him out. They will smoke. If they smoke, sometimes you've got to leave them alone. Sometimes you want to try and get them out of the smoke with torpedoes. Now each line, the nations, have different arrangements of their torpedoes, so there are nations which are better at targeting destroyers through smoke. The Russians, for example, they can drop 6 torpedoes in the water in one go, so you can cover a large area. The British, the American, they'll only drop 2 torpedoes in one run, so it's hard for you to sort of gauge where that destroyer is going to be and get them out of it. If they've got good AA as well, I tend to leave them alone and just go for the next closest thing. Once the smoke's gone, get back in there, try and spot them up again. If you're just hovering around somebody's smoke and you can't get damage on them, you're just losing planes down to their AA if they've got it turned on. Most good destroyers will have their AA turned off unless they are spotted. The AA on destroyers makes it a lot easier for you to target and find them as a carrier captain. It's so much harder to find a destroyer if they've not got their AA on. So all you destroyers out there, switch your AA off unless you need it on and you're spotted anyway. But don't do it when you're playing against me, because it makes it harder for me to find you. Anyway, so that's Great Britain. The Americans, so we'll pop onto the Ranger for that. So, again, survivability, average. Aircraft, artillery, very low. AA, above average. Maneuverability, average concealment. The aircraft, for example, on the Americans, their HP pool for both torpedoes and dive bombers, they're pretty average, the health they get. Their speed is quite slow, but their damage output is quite high. The torpedoes, they hit pretty well. The dive bombers, on the other hand, on, say, this Ranger and a lot of the tech tree American carriers, it'll hit like a truck. You get a good drop on a ship, it will wreck that ship. Fire chance is very high as well, 56%. So you kind of want to prioritize dive bombers in the Ranger or the tech trees. There are some ships that do better with torpedoes for Americans, say the Saipan. Very good torpedo bombers on the Saipan. But as a general rule, with the Americans, prioritize your dive bombers. That's where most of your damage is going to be from. It's going to be a lot harder for you to hit DDs, destroyers, in Americans with the dive bombers, just because you've got quite a big reticle to get them in. They're quite maneuverable, the destroyer, and you'll only drop 2 bombs, and that could go anywhere in there. I mean, you can have the best aim in the world, but RNG, you can't allow for that. You have some games you're hitting every shot. Some other games they just go everywhere, right on the outside of the reticle, and you've got no control. So Americans are quite hard to play just because it's hard to get rid of the destroyers. If you're playing Americans, you're probably going to be spotting destroyers and relying on your team a lot to kill that destroyer. By all means, you can take a run at them and try and do damage, but the more you drop your bombs, the less airplanes you're going to have in the air to keep that destroyer spotted, because they're going to start going back to your carrier for refueling. So yeah, sort of a average sort of carrier play, the Ranger, the Americans. Not very easy for a learner for taking out destroyers, and you do need to take out destroyers as quick as you can. There's just a few instances where you will not be targeting destroyers because they're in smoke, because they've got good AA cover. None of your team are looking at that destroyer, so you're just floating around in the air with nobody to shoot that destroyer. So you can only do so much with the situation you've been put in, and then you just go down to your next priority, which is spotting, really. Spot up people as much as you can. If there's a cruiser behind an island, lobbing HE over at your battleships, get there, spot him up. The battleships might then be able to lob some shells back over at him, and it's going to make him come out of that island pretty quick. So destroyers, spot in. If you can't do any of those two, or you've done them, you're just going to farm damage, and then you can go for battleships or your cruisers. Battleships are obviously a bigger target to hit. Cruisers going to take a lot more damage off you. So yeah, it's down to your personal preference then. But that's pretty much the Americans. I'm not going to go over the commanders for each. Not into their skill trees. I'll go over that in the other parts when I sort of break down the nations a little bit more. I would quickly go over, so it's Earn is King on the Americans. I'm using Tamo Yamaguchi for the Japanese. Apologies for any mispronunciations. I'm not very good at that sort of thing. But for the British, it's Dennis Boyd. For the Vesser and the Germans, it's Hans Geisler. And for Serov, the Russians, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. I seen somebody say the other day it looked a little bit like Elon Musk. So, yeah, but Yevgeny Preobrazhensky, maybe? I don't know, but that's the one I'm using for the Russians. I think that's all the nations for aircraft carriers. There's no others on any other nations that I can think of. So, yeah, we'll move on now to the Japanese. Okay. So for the Japanese, survivability, again, average. Artillery, very low, don't worry about it. AA is pretty good. A lot of these stats on all the nations, they probably won't be stock stats when you first buy the ship, because I obviously have spec'd into them with certain upgrades and commanders. So just take those stats with a pinch of salt. That's what you could get with certain builds. But most of my aircraft carriers, I build roughly the same. I play to their strengths on torpedo bombers or their dive bombers. I boost their AA to help with the other fighters, especially if you're pushing in with your group and it's late in the game and you're moving up with your battleships and your cruisers. You can help to take out the opposite planes then. You don't want to be hiding in the corner of a map in an aircraft carrier. Don't be the guy that as soon as you spawn in, turn your ship around and just beeline for the closest corner. You're going to really reduce your effectiveness because you're further from the battle. It's going to take your planes longer to get out there, to drop their bombs. You're just not doing anything. You want to be as close as you can to the action without exposing yourself. You just got to read the mini-map. Mini-map as an aircraft carrier is your best friend. So you got to get good at that. Maneuverability, below average. Concealment, above average. Doesn't really matter. The thing that matters is the aircraft. So the health pools for the aircraft is slightly below average. They're pretty squishy, the Japanese planes. They're quite fast, average to above average, I would say. They're pretty good for scouting. It's nice to try and scout at the start of the match for them because they're relatively quick compared to some of the other nations. The damage is pretty good damage, to be honest, on the Ryoyo, especially for the Japanese. I'm not going into the tier 7s, like I've said. Stats could change slightly. I'll go into that more in depth on later videos. But they're probably the best torpedoes on their tier, the Japanese. They hit hard. They're pretty fast, to be honest, the torpedo speed on them. If you like torpedo bombing, go with Japanese. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Torpedo bombing, it takes a little bit of practice, learning the leads, trying to anticipate where the ship you're attacking is going to be turning. So if you want to definitely just mainly focus on torpedo bombers, go with the Japanese. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Dive bombers, they're good bombs. They have the same sort of aiming reticle as the Americans, so they're quite hard to hit destroyers, a little bit RNG. But if you get a smack on them, say a battleship with these, you're going to do a lot of damage, about 2/3 of what the Americans will do. The fire chance is very high. So they're quite user-friendly, beginner-friendly, the Japanese. The only downside I would say for beginners is it's harder to hit destroyers, and you need to get good at hitting destroyers. Your team's going to depend on you to get them spotted and or hitting them. If you can't hit them, just keep them spotted. If nobody shoots at them, you can't do a lot about that, can you? If you're not getting any help with taking out destroyers that have been spotted, move on. You can harass the destroyer as much as you want. You can you'll probably struggle to hit him with certain nations, but just do what you can for whatever the situation in front of you is presented. So the torpedo speed, and yeah, that's pretty much it for the Japanese. So we'll now move on to the Germans. There we go. Stats: survivability, average. Artillery, very low. AA defense, pretty good. Maneuverability, average. You can see them in average. You're seeing a trend here with all these nations. They're all pretty much the same. It doesn't really matter too much which one you pick. It's the aircraft that make the difference for your attack runs and things like that. So the HP on the Germans is pretty good. They're very fast planes. They're very good for scouting, and because they've got good HP, if you make a mistake, you're not going to be as punished as much as you are with some of the other weaker nations in slow flying planes. So from that point of view, very user friendly from a beginner's standing. Yeah, from a beginner's standing is pretty good. So the damage on the torpedoes and the bombs. Best torpedoes, pretty much, as you can see on this stat screen. Not necessarily across the board, but they're very good torps. Across these 5 nations, they're the best torps that will do damage. Their torpedo speed is very fast, so it makes leading your target pretty easy. The bombs are good. The best thing about the bombs on the Germans is not because they don't set a fire chance. As you've probably noticed, there's no fire chance up there. They're AP bombs, so they can actually hit the citadel of a ship, and they do hit the citadel pretty good. If you're hitting midship, they will go through the deck pretty good. If you hit a turret, you're probably not going to get a pen on it. Again, you're not going to be that accurate when you're dropping. You can try, but with your crosshair straight on where you think it's going to land, it might not land there. So you could just do the best as you can. But yeah, that's a very beginner-friendly ship, but they're not very good for taking out destroyers compared to some of the other nations, Russian, British. I think the Russians are the best for taking out destroyers, but we'll move on to that in a minute. So best thing to do with the Germans is your usual tactics. Find the destroyers, keep them spotted, try and get them dead, get somebody to kill them, or you kill them. You probably have better luck taking out destroyers with the torpedo bombers than you will the dive bombers. That might be a bit easier because they're pretty good torpedoes on the Germans. I'd probably say the Germans were most user-friendly for beginners, that's where I would start. But again, it's personal preference, but they might give you the easiest time when you first start off playing carriers. If you do go with the Germans and you start playing with them, when you go to the other nations, you're going to struggle a little bit to get used to it because the Germans are pretty powerful. It's just every aircraft carrier is a bit different in situations. So that's pretty much that for the Germans. So the last one we've got to go on to is the Russians. And we'll just make this quick because the video's gone on a little bit longer than expected. So for the Russians, average survivability, very, very poor artillery. AA is above average, pretty good. Maneuverability is pretty good. Concealment's average. The Russians, well, I really like the Russians. They're very different to some of the other nations. They don't drop in waves on their bombers. They drop the whole squadron in one go. So if you've got 6 planes in the air, all 6 of those will dive down to drop their torpedoes. Whereas, say, on the Americans, only 2 will drop down, drop torpedoes. They go back to carrier. The other 4 will carry on round, and you can do more drops. Sirov will drop all of their torpedo planes, all of their skip bombers, all at the same time. They're very good at scouting because they're quite quick. And you can get them in and out of battle very quickly. They've also got quite long range on their torpedo and skip bombers, which means you can stay at the AA a little bit more if you drop very early. It's not very easy to drop early, especially for newer players. You take a risk at missing more. The further away from a target you are, the more chance there is of missing. You need to get in as close as you can to drop those bombs and the torpedoes. So the HP on the Russians is pretty weak. I think it's weak because you're going to get in, you're going to get out, you're going to drop all your bombs with torpedoes, then you go back to the carrier. Not many of them is going to survive to get back to the carrier. They replenish quite quickly. I don't tend to lose too many planes, and I've been deplaned. You can't pre-drop like other nations. We'll go into pre-dropping on another video. That's more of an advanced tactic. Just to save planes. So you can't pre-drop anyway on Russians. You just got to go out there, pick the best target, and attack. Then get your other bombers out there. Do it over and over and over again. While remembering your priorities, your destroyers, your spotting. Even down to the point of dropping your fighter planes to help your ships that are being attacked by the other carrier. We'll go into that again on another video with some more advanced tactics. But I drop my planes quite a lot to help, especially in division. If you got a destroyer in your division and he's trying to cap, you drop your fighter planes over top of that destroyer. Not many carrier players are going to want to go over there where you've dropped your planes, and if they do, they're going to get wrecked. The fighter planes will take out the aircraft quite quickly if they decide to attack it, which they don't always, so it's a bit glitchy, but there you go. The speed, as I said, on the Russians is fast. You can get around the map pretty good. They also have a boost when they come off the aircraft carrier, apart from other nations, so they get off the carrier quicker as well. Damage is average. Nothing special to speak about there with the damage. Torpedo speed is slow. It's hard to hit your torpedoes on the Russians. You've got to drop them a lot further out. Lots of lead. And they're slow, but you can manipulate the aiming reticle to give you a wider spread, which sometimes is quite helpful. It's just situal. It depends on the situation, really. The fire chance is pretty low on the skip bombers, but don't worry about that. They do a lot of damage anyway. The amount of times you'll go for a destroyer, and a lot of times you'll dev strike them if you hit them right and they're not paying too much attention. So yeah, then it's not too bad. For the Russians, I think if you want to go solely after destroyers, which, like I said, is a big part of the aircraft carrier's gameplay, the Russians are going to be the best for taking out destroyers. There are other nations out there with premiums and things like that. Say the Art Royal for the British, one of the best carriers in the game, I'd say, is my favourite, and I'm pretty sure it's probably going to have a nerf, but I think there's a little bit of things behind the scenes they can't talk about on why they can or cannot nerf it. But yeah, the Sirov, you find a destroyer out in the open, you get your bombs on target, it's going to wreck destroyers. If I'm playing a destroyer, I don't want to see a Russian carrier, because they can give you a real bad day real quick. And then you also don't have to rely on your team attacking that destroyer. You can drop your bombs and almost take it to the destroyer without any help. And the torpedoes, again, they're good because they drop all at once, but that also is sometimes a negative as well. It depends on the situation. If there is a destroyer in smoke, these are the Russians are the best at getting out the destroyers from smoke. You can spread your torpedoes through that smoke. 9 times out of 10, most destroyers will sit side on when they're in a smoke, because they like to keep all their guns on target when they're in smoke, because they think they're safe. Well, a lot of the time, people in destroyers, including myself, if I'm sat in a smoke, I usually die from a random torp that's come through the smoke from other destroyers or other aircraft carriers. And a side-on destroyer with 6 torpedoes coming through your smoke, you've got quite a good chance of taking that destroyer out. So, yeah, I think as a quick sum up for your best starter, I would say the Germans, they're going to be the easiest to use in most regards. The Russians are going to be the easiest to counter destroyers, which is a big part of your gameplay. If you like torpedoes, Japanese is going to be your best for dropping torpedoes. The British are sort of an all-rounder. Apart from their carpet bomb on the Ark Royal, which is very good, it's a lot better than the standard carpet bomb. You get an extra plane and it covers a wider area. It doesn't matter if you're coming from the bow to the stern. You can come from the broadside and still get good damage. So that's a little bit of a difference from the main line, really. A lot of people playing American carriers just because they like the look of them, or it's patriotic. Like I said at the start, pick the nation that appeals to you the most. I can only give you an opinion on what's going to make your time easier and what you're going to get after you've hit tier 3 and tier 5 and tier 7. There's even legendary tier carriers out now, so it's just to inform you what to expect from each carrier, and just have fun with it. Practice, stay out of trouble. Just have fun with it. You can really annoy some people. A lot of people don't like the carriers in the game. I'm not a carrier main. I think I'm probably more of a battleship main, but I still like to play them. They're quite fun, and they're quite good in divisions as well. If you've got some mates to play with, and you can start running cruisers with AA builds or battleships with AA builds to support your carrier that's playing, and you can rack up. I think my highest aircraft kills is 49 or something like that. That was in Atlanta when I was supporting. So I don't know, is it going to even say somewhere? Statistics. It's in somewhere. It's 40 something, I think, that I've done. No, it's versus AI. Ranked arena brawl now. So standard. There should be somewhere near. See how many planes I've killed in one go. There we go. Aircraft destroyed, bottom right. 49 aircraft in one game. So that's 2.5 clear skies, basically. I'm pretty sure that was when I was in Atlanta and my division mate was in his carrier. The opposite carrier decided he wants to fly over me all the time, and I just kept shooting him down. So it was a very good game, to be honest. I think I've got that somewhere, which I might showcase for an AA build. That's for another video anyway. So I hope you enjoyed the video and it was informative. Obviously you can reach out to me, message me, comment if you want any other information. If I give false information, constructive criticisms, actually fine. I'm quite new at doing this, so I'm just sort of starting out, and I thought I'd make a bit of a carrier series. So the next videos will probably be going into some gameplay and tactics on certain ships, so each nation. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.